A Swift Kickin' Ass, episode 17.
Welcome to a Swift Kicking the Ass podcast, hosted by lifelong friends Tom Stewart and John Curren. Today's episode is a special feature covering Robert Greene's 48 Laws of Power.
This is Tom Stewart. I'm joined here with my lifelong friend, John Curren. And as the intro said, we're covering Robert Greene's book, The 48 Laws of Power. And today we're covering law number 11, learn to keep people dependent on you. John, you want to do the judgment?
Oh, absolutely. This is a very short chapter, and here's the judgment. To maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. The more you are relied on, the more freedom you have. Make people depend on you for their happiness and prosperity, and you have nothing to fear. Never teach them enough so that they can do without you. It's a pretty interesting chapter.
Well, it's short, it's brief. This is something in my job that I hate to say it, but because I'm an engineer, people are dependent on me in order to keep the stations on the air, and it's a good thing because it keeps me employed. However, I'm not irreplaceable because obviously there's other engineers that, especially contract engineers, that they could hire out and replace me. However, they do not have the knowledge of the facility. Someone that works there day in and day out knows all the little tricks and all the nooks and crannies. In fact, I was the survivor of probably about 5 or 6 engineers that had been let go, and I was the only one left. They either let go or passed away or moved on. And having that made me valuable because, I was the one that knew everything, because they were very bad at documentation at the facility I worked at. And where normally most engineering shops you walk into, you can find like a book and it has like all the wires and how they're documented and what wire goes to where. Well, that hadn't been done in about 12 years. So that makes me very important. In fact, the engineer that I worked with, Ernesto, that was my mentor, he passed away of cancer. But I remember him before he died, he pointed to his head. He goes, "Tom, there's going to be a very big problem when I leave." He goes, "Because everything is up here," pointing to his head. And I thought, "Hey, man, Ernesto, we'll get a video camera. We'll go around. I'll follow you, and you record all your little secrets." And he never, when someone has cancer and they're dying, you think you have more time with them, and especially him. He worked up practically till the day he died. But you think you have more time and that you're going to have some time to actually do those things. And I never got around to videotaping this stuff he wanted to tell me. In fact, he called me on the day that he was... basically a week before he passed away. He had got admitted into the hospital. I was on vacation. And he called me. He said, "Dom, I'm going to die today. I must see you." And I was like, "Ernesto, you're not going to die today. I'm on vacation. I'll be back in town tomorrow. I'll come by the hospital and I'll see you." "No, I must see you today. I have something very important I must tell you that not even our boss knows." And I said, "All right, well, I'll be in there tomorrow." I see him. So I next day I kept my promise. I went to the hospital and, because he was a very good friend. He's the guy that taught me everything about engineering. Well, he was on morphine and he just kept on sitting up and, saying the name of one of our stations. It's kind of funny because one of our stations was Radio Mom B, and he'd sit up and go, "Mom B," and sit back down, and he'd sit up again and go, "Mom B." And I was like, "Ernesto, whatever it is, I'll figure it out. It's not worth you stressing about it here." And that was it. I never did find out what he died a week later to that day. Never found out what it was.
And now you'll never know.
No, but it doesn't matter. He taught me how to think, and that was the skill that all I needed. But this law is very applicable if you have the right job, and I guess you could do it in anything, but even in relationships, but it might not be the nicest thing.
I don't think that's very healthy, actually.
Right.
In a relationship. I was, as I'm reading the chapter, I was thinking, have our politicians read this book? Because
I think they wrote it.
They are masters at trying to keep people dependent on them. It's just, it's crazy. In fact, there's a quote in the book related to that by Niccolo Machiavelli, who says, "Thus a wise prince will think of ways to keep his citizens of every sort and under every circumstance dependent on the state and on him. And then they will always be trustworthy." That's
Machiavelli, you speak about, whether the politicians have read this book. I guarantee you they've read Machiavelli. Machiavelli was famous for a book called The Prince. And it's basically teaches you every dirty, underhanded trick in order to achieve political power. And that's a lot of the stories in this book were based on Machiavelli. I mean, you'll hear his name come up endless times.
Yeah.
Because I mean, they're very, you've heard the term, that's very Machiavellian. It means that's, you could walk away with a knife in your back. Very, but our society is actually, our entertainment is portraying that as something that's favorable. I mean, if you watch Survivor, if you watch Big Brother, I mean, that's how you win those games, is being, underhanded and playing a game of power.
Oh yeah, and you have to play the game. Something else I read in this chapter was very interesting to me, and it said necessity rules the world. And I mean, if you're not needed, what happens to you? In my case, because of the economy, about 4 years ago, because of the economy, my job was eliminated, and therefore the company could no longer support what my role was there doing. So the job got eliminated. Wasn't necessary for the company anymore. And I was thinking, as far as living on your own terms, how often people act when they aren't compelled to act. Meaning, said a different way, people rarely act unless they're compelled to do so. And I know from my Facebook site, a lot of people have posted their triggers for making big changes in their life. From my perspective, when my dad died, that was a big trigger for me to say, hey, you know what? I need to live more on my terms than I'm doing, in his honor, really. And a lot of people say that. Either they lose someone very close to them, or they lose their job, or they have a health scare. There's some trigger that forces you into making big change. Now,
absolutely. Keep going with your thought.
Well, I was actually, of course, going to go on another tangent like I always do.
I was going to mention the
observance of the law.
Been working on that accent. From the book, the observance of the law is about a guy named Bismarck, right? I think it was Ludwig Bismarck or something like that.
Otto.
It's like Dr. Octopus. He was an aide to the King of Prussia, right? So Bismarck allied himself with the King Frederick, who was known to be a weak and spineless, indecisive man. Bismarck, this guy, he decided that he was going to use this law, which definitely wasn't called Law 11 back then, but he knew that the concept of keeping people dependent on you. So what Bismarck was he was decisive. He was a strong guy, and he had his political agenda. So what he did is I'm sorry, I'm losing my place. Frederick, the king, no one liked Frederick. He was spineless. He was weak. He didn't have a lot of support. And so what Bismarck did is he went into this monarchy and befriended him and started defending the king and saying, hey, his plans are good. And then he started giving the king ideas on how he could make his plans better. Well, eventually the king, saw that loyalty and was like, you know what, come aboard and be my advisor. And secretly, Bismarck didn't like the king. He actually, disliked all his political ideas, but by being in a place of power to be able to influence the king, he was able to pass along his own ideas off as the king's and get them enacted.
Yeah, he basically grabbed the power. He had the power of the king, but he was not up front before the people. So he was basically almost, I guess, like a silent ruler, wasn't he?
Yeah, because they made a point of saying that the king has to deal with all the problems and all the headaches that come with being the master. However, if you control the master, you don't have to deal with the headaches, but you still get all the perks and the privileges.
Right. And as Tom said, the king was not very well liked. He had a lot of political enemies, and in the court, there was a lot of backstabbing. So Bismarck didn't have to deal with that really because he had the power, and he got a lot of the privileges and a lot of the good things that come out of being in that position. But
right, and Frederick
was not at risk.
Yeah, King Frederick eventually passed on, and his brother took over the mantle, and he eventually was crowned Emperor of Prussia. And I think it was even Germany, right? Is that what Prussia was a precursor
before
to?
Germany.
Before Germany. Yep. But they built Prussia up to being, one of the strongest nations in that area. And Bismarck, benefited by that because, alongside, I think he became a chancellor to the emperor. And of course, that was a very high, powerful, position.
Yeah. Now, as I was reading this chapter, as a parent, this law goes against every bone in my body because I'm raising my children to be independent, not dependent. I don't want them being dependent on me. But as I think more about it, this dependency isn't true dependency. There's an interdependency. So you're dependent on one another. And I know that at this point in my children's lives, they are dependent on me and my wife to provide for them. But as they get older and become adults and become independent, I think I'll be moving the other way. I'll be more dependent on them. And I hope that they take good care of me in my old age.
Yeah. So good luck with that. My daughter just turned 18 and she's, it's funny because I'm like joking with her. She told me today that for prom that she's going to have a very expensive dress because she just bought one for her homecoming. She goes, dress was under $100, but for prom, it has to be very expensive. And I said, well, hey, you're 18 now. Do I have to really buy your prom dress? And she said, yes, when you decided to have me as a little baby, that comes as part of the package. You have to pay for my prom dress. So I was giving her a hard time about it.
How can you falter on that argument?
Yeah, I know.
And she, daughters, I think they have their fathers in the palm of their hands most of the time. I know mine do.
Well, if she doesn't, she could probably choke me out or throw me on the ground and use her jujitsu against me in some way because she is a tough little girl.
That's true. Very well-rounded. You and Jen did a great job with her.
Thank you.
As I was looking at the reversal, what happens when you're on the top, in the top of the food chain? There's no one that you are dependent on. You have complete control. And I find that, very interesting. This law is really a two-way street. But what happens when you're up on top? Where, such as J.P. Morgan or John Rockefeller, they drove out all the competition. They were in complete control. And what it said is that there is a price to pay for that. And you're forced to isolate yourself. And most of the time, monopolies turn inward and destroy themselves from the internal pressure. So is, an interdependence associated with this law.
Yeah, I agree. They also brought up the point, which is, it made me think of you, where they talk about some people wish that they could just go and live in the woods and that would be truly being powerful because they were free to go whenever they want. If you had a cabin in the woods and didn't belong to, have any ruler over you or any government, you see some of these people like the mountain men where they go up and they live off the land. right? And they assume that is a form of power because they're not dependent on anyone. However, they really have no power. They have independence and the freedom that independence to come and go, but they don't have true power. They can't make anything happen. No one will listen to them. They have no leverage.
Well, I think that I agree with you in part and not on the other. I think that they have power over themselves, but that power is isolated. So this whole book is really not only about having your own power and having that isolated power with just yourself, but an expanded range of power.
Right. It's amping up. I mean, this book is really for ascending all the way up to becoming, the ultimate power. Not personal power. Like, this is not Anthony Robbins, where it's just talking about taking control of yourself, and which is nothing wrong with that. Which I think you have to take control of yourself before you can actually control others, effectively.
Yeah, I agree. And my wife actually asked if she needed to be worried about me because of my desire to, I find going off the grid and being totally independent, raising your own food and living in a very tiny house and not having a mortgage. And I find aspects of that very, refreshing compared to today's society, whereas everyone has to live in a big house and drive an expensive car, and they're in the rat race, so they have to go to work to support their lifestyle. And I find people who go off the grid, they don't have the mortgage, they're raising their own food, there is not the demand to enter the rat race. So I find that refreshing. I for one couldn't do that at this point in my life, but I wouldn't mind having a little cabin up in the woods just in case.
No, I agree with you, man. Like I said, I don't want to be a backwoods, what do they call it? The Unabomber, Ted Kaczynski, that lived out in the cabin in the woods, with a resentment of society. I just want freedom. I want, be able to, I would like to be able to come and go as I want. And what I would really want is not to have to drive through an hour and a half of rush hour traffic every morning and every afternoon, because that just wears on you. And that is my dream, is just so I can relax and not have to do that.
Yes. So
I'll get an RV. That way, when I'm driving through traffic, at least I'm living the dream.
And probably cursing even more because you don't want to go through stop and go traffic in an RV.
No, I know. Especially in Miami.
Unless you just pull over to the side and wait it out.
I mean, there's commutes, and then there's commutes through like hellacious areas. When I commute, every day there's an accident. They have these express lanes, and just Friday I was driving, I was stuck in traffic. And I look over and there's a lady laying on the ground, and the EMTs are working on her there on the highway. And it's like, is it worth it? Is it worth putting yourself at risk just to get to work a few minutes earlier, or to make it on time so you don't get in trouble, but you're risking your life?
Yeah, no, I agree. When I lived in Atlanta, I lived 28 miles from work, and it would take me a solid hour and a half in the morning to get there, taking the back roads, because I'm just not crazy enough to hit the highways at that time. It would take me much longer. And then it would take me several hours to get home in the afternoon. So I understand. And we create situations to where we are dependent on our jobs, or, certain things to have the lifestyle that we have. So I think that the takeaway from this chapter is to really look at what you are dependent on and look for ways to better your situation and better your conditions that you live with. If you're tired of the commute, like I was in Atlanta, I moved to Richmond, Virginia, where I can get anywhere within the city in 20 minutes. And the rush hour, there's not really a rush hour. People say there is, but it's never really gridlocked.
Right.
There might be and I had to laugh when I first moved up here, and the realtor said, well, and this is before I worked at home. They said, oh, you might have a little bit of a commute living out here. And I said, well, what kind of commute? She said 20 minutes. I was like, yeah, I think I could do that.
That's like when I was stationed in Omaha when I was in the Air Force, and people were like, "Oh, be careful when you drive through the hood." And I'll be driving. I'm like, "What are you talking about? Where's the hood?" I mean, driving and the hood. Their houses look better than some of the houses we have here in the nice neighborhoods. I'm like, "That's not the hood." You have no concept of what the hood is.
Yeah, it is really a matter of perspective. I know when my mom, comes up here, she talks about how much we drive around. And that's because in Hollywood, Florida, I mean, everything is 5 minutes away. She really doesn't do a lot of driving, and it's flat. So you're covering, a mile or two in traffic. I mean, but around here, I may have to drive 15 miles to get to where I want to go. It doesn't take me all that long. I'm used to it. It's not a big deal. But it's just a matter of perspective.
Sure. I think we've beat this dead horse. It's a very short chapter, and I don't know what else to say other than there was a cool Machiavelli quote, which I don't happen to see, but I've heard it before, and the gist is basically it's better to be feared than loved, and that's something not to necessarily strive for, but it's pretty neat if you're a Sith Lord or something.
And I'll just suggest that you look up a neighing sound for us for our audio.
All right. Please check us out and give us some reviews in iTunes. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to A Swift Kick in the Ass podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's content, and we ask you to please leave us a review in iTunes. Also, head over to aswiftkickintheass.com to get a free copy of the Simple Spending Tool.